On the Healthy Human Revolution podcast, Dr. Lori Marbas interviews nutrition and lifestyle medicine experts and extraordinary guests whose informative and inspiring stories will empower you with the knowledge to transform your life and health.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dr. Lori Marbas, and I'm so excited to welcome back my dear friend, Dr. Jud Brewer. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, it's such a blast to talk to you. I always learn so much. I tell patients when I send them your direction, like, you're just get ready for wisdom. It's gonna be amazing. So, all right. So I really want to focus about all the amazing resources that you have available, because I send patients at least several a week on a regular basis. Like, you really need to focus on this. So I really would like to start with your apps. And so we have one on Eat Right Now, we have the Unwinding Anxiety, and then the Craving to Quit. But if we can maybe just start with Eat Right Now, can you just tell me a little bit about what that's about, kind of how it evolved, and go from there?
Sure. So it actually came serendipitously, as many things do. I was developing our craving program and was having some people pilot test it. And typically when somebody quits smoking, they gain about 15 pounds. That's the average weight gain, because they tend to substitute food, or the stimulant effect is gone, or whatever. And so some of our pilot testers said, well, I've changed my eating habits, or, something about eating. And I was thinking, okay, well, it's normal, expected that they're going to gain weight. And they said, no, I'm losing weight. And I said, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And they said, yeah, I'm applying these principles to my snacking, and it's helping me not snack when I'm not hungry. And this is when my eyes popped out of my head. And so, when I put them back in my head, I started looking into how eating, it gets formed in the same habitual process. It's like eating in the absence of hunger, I should say, gets formed in the same process as smoking. Because I had mostly been researching addictions in the past. So smoking, alcohol, cocaine, things like that. I hadn't done any work with eating. And so, I looked into it and I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is the same habit forming process. I need to look at this more. And so we developed the Eat Right Now program and pilot tested it with some folks in my clinic first. So I started with people with binge eating disorder, because I was thinking, let's start with the extremes. If it works for the extreme ends of the spectrum, then it'll help for other folks.
Yeah, let's just start with the hardest group.
Go big or go home. So I pilot tested all of the materials out. I actually remember first writing out the modules and having them read through them. Then I recorded CDs. Do you remember what those are?
Yeah, I think so. Those little circular things.
Yeah, the frisbee looking thing. So we recorded CDs, and I would give CDs out to my patients in my clinic, at their visits. And say, go listen to week 1, listen to week 2, listen, and blah, blah, blah. And then we created the app. So it's 28 core modules. So 4 weeks, where it's like 10 minutes of videos of, kind of a short didactic video, some animations to help explain core concepts, and most importantly, in the moment practices where people go throughout their day. And if they're struggling with the craving, they can work with it. And one of the things we embedded later was this craving tool, where we have people, when they're craving to eat food, we have them go through this simulated checklist where they imagine eating the food, and then, how's it feel in your stomach, all of this, and do they have more of a craving for it? And we don't have to go into all the science about that, but basically it's based on this reward-based learning process, where the reward value is what drives future behavior. And if they pay attention when they're overeating or whatever, they realize, oh, that's not so good. And it helps reduce that reward value. We're about to publish a paper showing that it takes as few as 10 or 15 times of people using this craving tool for them to actually significantly reduce the reward value down, or even below zero, below the not eating behavior.
Oh, wow.
And so all of that stuff's built right into the app. Through the apps, they also have access to an online community that I moderate every week, so they can come in and ask questions if they're struggling, those types of things. So that's the core basic framework. Some modules that they go through sequentially, some in the moment tools that they can use the moments that they're struggling with cravings, and then this community that they can join and keep track of their progress and ask questions through.
Yes, which is also, and I've been to all of it, to your online community, to the app and everything. And it's been really fun to see the feedback from patients. So I've had several patients go through even just your freer version there. and they're like, I've learned so much about myself. But it does bring a lot of questions. We end up talking about food addiction and being an addiction psychiatrist. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, is it a real thing? If it is, like, can you define that for us? Because it's kind of questionable in some spaces that people don't accept it.
Yes, and I'm not going to wade into the, people are fighting back and forth, oh, it's
Hmm.
this, it's not this.
Right.
What I'll say is, pragmatically speaking, what I find is that there tend to be two categories of people. And so let's start with a definition of addiction. The simplest definition is continued use despite adverse consequences, right? So if you just take that definition, which is a pretty well accepted definition of addiction, it simplifies things quite a bit. So if somebody is continuing to eat, overeating despite adverse consequences, that squarely falls into the definitional category of addiction.
Mhm.
So, and then if somebody, there are lots of folks who have been arguing about whether sugar is more addictive than cocaine and things like that. We don't need to get into all the details, but
Mhm.
because pragmatically speaking, it's when somebody is doing something and continuing to do it despite adverse consequences, it's a problem, right? And
Right.
obesity is a clear result of somebody eating in the absence of hunger, for example.
Right. Right. And then, of course, all the chronic diseases that come with obesity, diabetes, hypertension. I mean,
Yeah.
95% of my patients are diabetic. But yeah, that's a great way to frame, is like, well, it's a problem, regardless of your definition, if it's addiction, quote unquote, accepted or not, it's a problem. And these tools will work with it regardless.
Yes. Yes.
So
And
fantastic.
the other thing I'll mention is we find some people who really just struggle and struggle and struggle. This is like my patients with alcohol use disorder. Some of them, they just have to be abstinent their whole lives, and probably because of their genetics and whatever the conditioning was that was set up around the drinking, that it's just, they're one in and they're gone.
Right.
There's no moderation for them. And for many others, they can cut down their drinking to the, where they can pay attention as they drink, and they realize. I was just talking to a patient yesterday who was saying, she was really paying attention. She was drinking a ton of hard alcohol at night, and she was realizing after 2 drinks, it was actually not doing anything. She wasn't getting more of a buzz, and she was getting all the negative effects. So she was able to just pay attention there and cut back from that to just drinking a little bit of white wine, from these. So I see the same thing. So that, for the majority of folks, I think that's the case also with eating, where they can see very clearly the negative effects of eating, processed carbohydrates and sugar and things like that, and compare that to the natural goodness that I think of it that comes with like whole food plant-based diets, right? And it's easy for them to moderate this because they simply imagine eating the junk food and how that makes them feel versus eating the healthy food and imagining what that's like. For some people, they're just, they are just so much on the sugar addiction spectrum, if you want to think of it as sugar addiction, where it's like when they eat a little bit of sugar, they're just off to the races. Like some of my folks with alcoholism, much smaller fraction of folks, but they're the folks that really have to kind of, say, not even give themselves the choice, where they're like, just, I don't eat sugar. Or I don't eat refined sugar. So I just want to mention that as well, because it can help for people to explore these rather than trying to force themselves into abstinence when they don't necessarily need to, and that's too much for them, or force themselves or kind of be in the, oh, maybe I can moderate, and then they just struggle the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So I have 2 questions about that. So first of all, I have patients who can do both, right? Some they're like, and they're typically my younger, healthy ones who want to eat healthier, but on occasion can do a splurge, and they're fine. But then I have others who, that are morbidly obese, diabetic, hypertensive. And I'm like, your life really kind of depends on you being abstinent, But then there's this social context, this social complications with trying to get healthier with eating, right? Because it's something we have to do every day. But there may be family members in the same household who either want to, I don't know if it's like a sabotage of the family member, or they don't agree with it and they keep that stuff in the house, and it makes it really hard for the patient, because I'm always advocating for home being your safe zone, so you don't have to use so much like constant just pushing at you in front of your eyeballs, or like, hey, eat me. Do you have any suggestions or advice for people who are dealing with that?
Well, here I suggest that people, so if somebody's coming to see you, for example, bring everybody into the conversation. so everybody can have a clear sense of what the goal is. And there are very few family members that are like, I want my family member to be less healthy, And so sometimes it's a matter of just helping everybody be reminded of what the goal is, right? The goal is for this person to reduce their A1C or something, lose some weight or whatever. And what are the things that are getting in the way? And then also in that conversation can be explored some of the hangups that other family members might have around eating healthy, where they're just afraid of it, they don't understand it, or they're just kind of like, well, I want to be able to have my sugar, where they haven't actually explored the benefits that come from healthy eating, for example. And so there, it's easier if everybody's in the conversation to see what the goal is. And what I do is I break it down a little bit. I say, oh, let's just try for a week. Just see what it's like. You do the experiment with your family member to, try eating healthy and just take some notes. See what it's like for you. Do you get the sugar rush and crash? Do you, are you more irritable? How do you sleep? All that stuff. And also see what it feels like to be on the same page as your loved one, because there's a real value and reward in all working together toward a common goal as well. And so that's not to be discounted. That's a piece that can be really leveraged, where you bring everybody together and say, well, what's it like to all be on the same team as compared to be fighting with each other? So I think those are just some of the aspects that can be played with there. And really it's about helping people experience it for themselves. They can't be forced into something or doing something, begrudgingly. It's really about them having to be curious and interested themselves. You're like, whoa, what's it like for me to try this for a week? What conceptions do I have around not getting to eat my junk food or whatever?
Absolutely. And I like the family members are not immune to having, their own kind of quote unquote food addictions and issues. Most of the time they do. I mean, they're usually eating together and going through that. It's a really interesting, I do a lot of family gatherings, spouses together, because it's telemedicine. So it's some really fascinating conversations. And oftentimes there's some collateral benefits, I call it, when someone switches to a plant-based diet and everybody jumps on. And I've had multiple times where I've had spouses jump in and was like, hey, I hear your blood pressure is getting low. We need to talk about that. Literally, it's kind of frightening to think about some things that are so good that they can harm you if you're still on medications, but
right.
It happens regularly. So that's the Eat Right Now app, guys. I would highly recommend that. It's a phenomenal app. Jud's phenomenal. He's extremely bright. My son is actually listening to your Craving, the Craving Mind book on Audible. And he's like, Jud he's really awesome, Mom. Like, I know, isn't it great? So you get a multiple Marvis fan club here going. But then we have the Unwinding Anxiety. So that was so cool. When I first discovered you was through the Craving to Quit app, because one of my patients had used that. And then I understood this anxiety as a habit. That was like, for me, like, whoa, I never thought of it that way, but it gave me a different way of thinking or approaching my patients. Can you describe what that app is and how that evolved actually?
Yeah, so that actually came on the heels of our Eat Right Now program. So as we were working, as more and more people were using the Eat Right Now program, a lot of people were saying, as they were mapping out their habit loops around eating, they were saying that anxiety was triggering eating for them. And so they started asking, hey, can you make a program for anxiety? And I was thinking, I'm a psychiatrist, I treat anxiety, but, I'm interested in habit change. But there was something that kind of got under my skin, and I started doing the research. And it turns out there's this huge literature back from the 1980s.
Wow.
Back when, I don't know, what were the 80s memes, like big hair and leather pants? I don't know.
Oh, you were in the 80s. What are you talking about?
Oh, parachute pants. That's what I'm thinking.
Parachute pants, you had the banana clips, definitely big hair, party, business front, party in the back. You had the what they call it? The mullet. Yes.
And fluorescent shoelaces. I remember fat fluorescent shoelaces.
Yes.
So back when I had fat fluorescent shoelaces in grade school, this guy, T.D. Borkovec at Penn State, was studying anxiety and worry in particular as a negatively reinforced behavior. And so when I went and looked at this literature, I was thinking, he's already made this connection between reward-based learning or reinforcement learning and the negatively reinforced qualities of worry and anxiety. And so I was thinking, well, this is perfect. There's been a lot of research showing that mindfulness training can be helpful for anxiety. Let's see if we can use this as the basis for developing our Unwinding Anxiety app. So same framework. I think there are 30 core modules instead of 28, but it's the same idea, short didactic video modules, in the moment exercises, tools, online community, all that stuff. So we developed a program, pilot tested it, and we actually built into it something that we had learned from the Eat Right Now community, which is I was seeing this stepwise process, this 3-step, where somebody would be able to map out their habit loops in step 1. We would use this reward-based learning or this reinforcement learning quality of reward value in step 2, having them explore, how unrewarding is it to overeat, and then have them explore what I call the BBOs, the bigger, better offers of stepping out of the habit loops into mindfulness practices. We used a gears analogy because I'm a bike rider, mountain bike, and grew up on a BMX bike and all that. And so we said, well, let's build this infrastructure, this scaffolding of these 3 steps or these 3 gears right into the Unwinding Anxiety app. So it's slightly different than the other one in that respect because it kind of brings that right into the core of the training. And then, so once we developed it, of course, I'm a scientist, so we went to do the research on it. And we actually started, our first study was an open label study with the hardest patient population that I could think of to work with, right?
You are so funny. Yes.
So guess who was the hardest one?
You and me. Yeah.
Right.
Doctors, we're horrible.
Yeah.
Oh, are we? Yeah.
So, we learned to armor up in medical school, not work with our emotions, just stuff it all in the closet. We learned to be martyrs where it's like, oh, I can't help myself. I need to be out there helping patients, that's why, all that stuff, So I was thinking, well, let's do this study with physicians. So we did a study. One, it was the easiest study we ever recruited for because there's so many anxious physicians out there. And 2, we just looked at anxiety. We also looked at burnout. And we found that we could get I think it was a 57% reduction in clinically validated anxiety scores in anxious physicians after 3 months. And we also got a significant reduction in some aspects of burnout, like emotional exhaustion and callousness, which was also cool because in the program, it doesn't mention anything about burnout, but the 2 are highly correlated, anxiety and burnout. So did our first study there. We replicated that in an NIH-funded study, a randomized controlled trial of people with generalized anxiety disorder. Got, I think it was a 60% or 63% or some huge percentage reduction there. And so we're seeing two studies. We just did a 3rd study where we looked at this program for sleep because a lot of times people get caught up in anxiety and worry that keeps them from sleeping. So we did a 3rd study with sleep, also found that it could improve people's sleep just by addressing the anxiety. So 3 positive studies showing that this app actually works pretty well. And so we're still doing more research, but so far, we're seeing some pretty good data. And I have to say, it's really nice to see a 60% reduction in anxiety after just a couple of months with a freaking app.
Right.
That's great.
Well, I'll tell you, I think I texted you that I saw a patient, and this was like, I don't know, it's been last year, 2 years out. Must have been 2 years ago. But when I had a patient do the anxiety, came in with really severe anxiety, panic attacks, kind of a new onset, nothing acutely traumatic in the life. I was like, well, I got 2 important things for you. It's really, really important, like homework. We can talk about medication. So I did prescribe a medication, and I said, but I need you to do this app like your life depended on it. Okay. I was really serious, like the mom approach. She like, come, you have to do it. And he did. Young man, very, very pleasant. And he came back in 30 days and he goes, Dr. Marbus, I have to tell you something. I didn't start the medication, but I did do the app and I feel amazing. His anxiety like went from, the GAD-7 high scores down to like nothing in 30 days. I'm pretty sure it's like, you won't believe this is great.
I remember you letting me know that. Yeah, it was amazing.
Pretty awesome. And I've seen this replicate itself in my patients. So, it's really, I don't think people understand the power of something like that. It's like, oh, it's just an app. But I was like, but you're really implementing these exercises in your mind. And it's just so easy to use. And I think people are almost like, yeah, right, it's just so simple. I was like, no, really, it is just that easy to just go through the app. And so that's really, really fun. And in real world, I know you got the research studies. I'm like, people, this really works. So if you're a doc out there, definitely send your patients that way. It's really amazing. If you're a patient, or person who's suffering from that, that really honed it in for me. When I saw that reaction, I was like, wow, this is so cool. So thank you for that. And I'm sure others will as well. But now let's talk about Craving to Quit. And because that is a really interesting thing, because that was your first initial app and into the kind of the research you're doing. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how that came about?
Yeah. So the idea behind that was I'd done my first clinical study, my first randomized controlled trial with smoking cessation with mindfulness training. I'd compared it to gold standard treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy, the American Lung Association's freedom from smoking. And that was an in-person study. We had gotten, ready for this, 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment.
This is the quit rate.
So I was thinking, okay, I'll take that. That's pretty good. And then I realized, this habit loop formation or reinforcement learning is set up to help people learn things in a specific context. So people don't learn to smoke in my office, right? People learn to overeat in my office. So I said, well, can I package my office and deliver it to them in context? And might it be, as effective or more effective there? So that's when we started thinking about developing these app-based mindfulness training programs. And we've been fortunate enough, Yale, I was working at Yale at the time, they had spun off this startup based on some of my neuroimaging research. And the CEO that we hired was this young, very smart documentary filmmaker. She had just gone through the Yale School of Management, but her previous life, she had done documentary films. And so she said, I can record videos. I know how to do this. And that was actually what started the idea around the pragmatics of putting these short videos together in an app. So it just happened to be serendipity.
Wow.
So long story short, so we made the program and then we started, of course, studying it. And I have to say the latest study that we published, we were able to, this is an NIH funded study where we randomized people to get the Craving to Quit app or the National Cancer Institute's Quit Guide. They have an app to help people quit smoking. But before we randomized them, we brought them into our neuroimaging facility and we scanned their brains as we were showing them smoking cues. This was in collaboration of a friend and a colleague at Harvard, Amy Janes, who had developed this great smoking cue paradigm. So we show that their brains light up in these brain regions that we had previously found get deactivated in experienced meditators. And so we're thinking, well, maybe this would be a nice way to target this. So we randomized them to get these apps. We scanned them a month later so we can get this pre and post. And lo and behold, we found a very strong correlation between reductions in brain activity in this default mode network that gets activated when people get caught up in craving, and a reduction in cigarette smoking. We also found a dose-dependent response. So the more modules they completed, the better they did. Yet this effect was specific to the Craving to Quit app. The other app, no correlations at all.
Really?
None at all. In fact, we could account for 58% of the variance. Basically, we could account for 58% of the effect with just 3 factors. Baseline number of cigarettes people smoke. So the more they smoked, the better they did. The amount that their brain activity decreased, and then the number of modules they completed. Whereas we got no variance accounted for in the control group. So here we're seeing, I think of this as the Holy Trinity, where you line up theory with the scientific Holy Trinity. You line up theory with brain mechanism with clinical outcomes. So the theory that mindfulness would help people let go of their cravings, work with them, the showing of the brain mechanism, and then that leading to outcomes. But ultimately, this was borne out on some pilot work that I did. I remember working at the VA hospital with my patients and helping them. I mapped this out on my whiteboard in my office, where I would help them see that cravings were these physical sensations that came up in their body, and that they would feel like they're going on forever, but they actually plateaued and go away. So when they can start to see the plateau and not actually smoke to make it go away, but see that they could ride these out, I realized, wow, this is something that we could do. And then that became our clinical study in person. And then that became the Craving to Quit app.
Amazing. And so have you done any of the brain imaging with your other apps?
Not yet, but we have some NIH, we have some grants into the NIH specifically to study those, because I'm so interested in seeing if we can see similar effects there. And in fact, this same brain network, the default mode network, gets activated in people with anxiety. So when they perseverate, when they worry about the future, it activates the posterior cingulate in particular. And also that same brain region gets activated when people get caught up in food cues and seeing images of high caloric content foods.
How interesting. So that is incredible. So when you're sitting here and you're thinking about all these different, I mean, how do you say this is the most important thing to research? Because I think there's just so many ways you could go and learn, and oh man, maybe I should go into research. But what do you think? I really do. I'm beginning to wonder now. Where do you decide, like, here's the next best thing, like, to go and develop, because you've created another book that's coming out, and let's just do that real quick. What's your new book's title and when to expect it, for folks can look into it?
So the new book is same title as the Unwinding Anxiety app. It's called Unwinding Anxiety. It's coming out through Penguin Random House, is already available for pre-order on Amazon. But I think the official launch date is March 9th.
Excellent. So that's fantastic. So on Amazon, guys, check it out. It's going to be an awesome book. And when do you decide, like, how, as a researcher, I'm always interested in, you look at these studies, like someone came up with this idea. Some of those studies you're like, how they get funding? I'm like, this is useless. But then there's this other's like, oh my goodness, that's such a brilliant idea. I would have never put that together. Like, how do you decide what's worthy of your time and expense?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, because I could spend a lot of time researching things that don't matter. So I think this is where I look for a convergence between what my patients are struggling with in my clinic and what the theory is in the research literature, to see, is there a gap in the literature, and is the same gap something that I can see, pragmatically and clinically in my patients. So for example, with all of, with anxiety, with smoking, with eating, there's this heuristic, or this real emphasis on willpower, right? There's this idea that willpower is the way to change habits. It actually hasn't been borne out in the literature, and clinically, we have an obesity epidemic. So you would think if Weight Watchers were the way to go, they've been around for 50 years, so right. Why wouldn't, if it's going to work, it's going to work by now. So here's a gap in the clinical, in the clinic, where willpower is not helping my patients quit smoking or stop cocaine or stop overeating. We're seeing that willpower is more a heuristic than a clinic, than a neuroscientific element. The cognitive neuroscientists don't study willpower, because they're like, there's nothing there to study. Right. It's just like this idea that people have that sounds good. But in fact, there's really not a lot of evidence behind it. So that's something that we looked at. And the third thing that I bring in is, how could we pragmatically target these things? So this is from my own direct experience. I was seeing that when I was learning mindfulness, the folks, from 2,500 years ago, they were using the same language as my patients in terms of getting caught up in craving and clinging and things like this. And in fact, with the, in Buddhist circles, the idea was that you could actually work with your craving to overcome bad habits. And so the treatment was already developed. It's not like I had to come up with some new treatment and develop it. It was already there. So that's where I was like, wow, this is a no-brainer to research this. Nobody's really looked into this. Here's the gap in, here, I see this in my clinic. And here's something that has been, theorized to be helpful for 2,500 years. If it were really a snake oil, it wouldn't have survived that long, from a Darwinian perspective. So I just brought all of this together and started researching them, wow. and then to see the effects, 5 times the quit rates of gold standard for smoking. That's when I was thinking, wow, there's really something here. It's worth really putting more resources into. Absolutely. So, it just went from there. It's like the same types of tools. Does this apply? Does this work for eating? Yes. Does this work for anxiety? Yes. It's not like it's going to work for everything, but if we look to see where there are behaviors that really fall squarely into the reinforcement learning paradigms, that's where I'm going to spend some time to see if we can, develop treatments and then study those treatments to see if they'll work.
I mean, it's really fun. I mean, there's so many potential places to actually apply the general concept of what you've been studying. I mean, it's really fascinating. So now, because we've been speaking as clinicians, and so you've also created a really awesome course. I send other, physicians to, and it's on DrJud.com. Can you talk to us about that?
Yes. So I think there are a lot of misconceptions around what mindfulness is. And I honestly, I went to Yale for residency, so it wasn't like it was a slouch residency program, but I didn't learn how the reinforcement learning was critical for addictions. Like that just wasn't in our teaching. So I don't think there's a lot in the lexicon around reward-based learning and habit change. I mean, that's something that my lab has studied and hopefully is starting to get out there a little bit, but it takes a lot of time for these things to kind of seep into the literature, especially when it's not the dominant paradigm. So there, I think, looking at this, let me just pause here for a second.
Because we were taking, from the standpoint of being a clinician and using, like, how do I introduce this to patients? How do I define it? How do I move forward learning myself? And what you've done is you've created such an excellent resource, and it's a free resource, which is phenomenal. And there's some great other articles too, but anyway, so can you just, type of thing?
So I'll talk a little bit about this. So I was thinking, well, it's helpful, why not get this, now that there's enough research out there and theory out there, why not just put together a short CME course for clinicians so they can learn, what basically the basics of habit formation, because that's helpful for any clinician, and also how this relates to mindfulness. I also threw a couple of modules in there around clinician burnout, because I think that's important for all of us to understand, and how things like mindfulness can help with that. So the course is, I think it's 7 20-minute videos. It's all free. People can even get CME credits through Brown University for that. And the idea was just, let's try to help out our fellow clinicians and hopefully help them help their patients really get at the mechanistic components. And the nice thing is everybody benefits there. So if a clinician is helping this personally, right? When your patients are doing well, they feel good and you feel good.
Oh yeah, that's what I call veggie crack. I think we talked about this. It's like I tell you to eat vegetables, you get better. I get a dopamine release because I'm helping you, and we continue this. Please continue my veggie crack addiction. Like, okay. But yeah, it's really cool, and I think honestly, when you have more tools that are really working for patients, that is your antidote to burnout. Because I know lifestyle medicine was certainly, I hear it over and over again for docs who take this approach because they're seeing true healing from literally the foundational aspect of really getting patients off medications, feeling better, living life that they weren't living before due to illness. I mean, that is truly, I think, the true antidote for most cases of burnout. So it's really phenomenal to have you use extra tools that you've already created. Yeah. And then there is this one article you wrote about curiosity, because I know we're short on time here, but do you just tell us a little bit about curiosity? Because I think it is such a really fun article, and I learned so much in thinking about it. And I start, because it's like you hint around it in clinic, but you kind of labeled it and made it like, oh, that's what that is. So I think it's really fun.
Yeah. So this ended up being one of the main themes of my new book, the Unwinding Anxiety book. As a tool, I think of curiosity as a superpower. And I wrote this article after spending my summer, it's like, what am I going to do over, between, so my teaching in the spring and the fall semester, it gives me a little bit of extra room to kind of think, what do I want to learn, over the summer? So 2 summers ago, I started getting really interested in curiosity. And it was, I was at a think tank and somebody mentioned that there were 2 types of curiosity. And I had no idea that there were 2 types. I had just, from my own natural propensity to be curious about things, I was just like, oh, curiosity is curiosity. But it turns out that there are two types, and these are, these have been written about and studied scientifically. One's called deprivation curiosity, and one's called interest curiosity. So I think of deprivation as destination, right? And it's that itch. It's like when we don't know something, we get that restless itch that says, go figure that out, go find that. And once you get that a piece of information, that itch has been scratched, you're at your destination. The other type of curiosity is interest curiosity. This is the curiosity that I thought was the only one. Think of that as the journey or the process, where it's like just the joy of discovery is fun. So it doesn't matter. We don't have to get anywhere. There's no restless, scratchy itch that needs to be, scratched. It's basically like just the joy of discovery. So nobody's really, there's a guy, Jordan Littman, that kind of highlighted the difference between the two in the scientific literature. But I wanted to really just put something together for everybody to kind of understand the difference between these two things, because they can be played off of each other. It's not like one is bad and one is good. Deprivation curiosity is reinforced in a negative way, a negative reinforcement way. So we can kind of get addicted to checking facts on our phones. So it's not always helpful, but the interest curiosity can actually be brought in to complement the deprivation curiosity. And in fact, we can use interest curiosity to help with anything. Anytime we're caught up in a habit loop, we can get curious. Map it out. What's it feel like? All that. And so that interest curiosity is really a superpower to help us change behavior.
I mean, honestly, I look at this and I think about young parents, and if they could start teaching the kiddos about the curiosity, and think about their children's behavior and the habits and it's just it's just so powerful with kids and parenting.
Well, here I would say have the kids teach their parents, because the 3-year-old has a natural fascination. The kid stared at a blade of grass for 20 minutes. The parents are like, what? That's grass. Like, no, but look at and so that can awaken our curiosity. And then as parents, the parents can help them keep that curiosity as they grow up. They don't grow out of it. Everybody wins.
Right. 100%. And I will tell you, and as a parent, you can use that to solve problems even for your kids. Like, so just quickly, Jonathan, who's now your newest big fan, who had severe dyslexia growing up. And I had this driving force to figure out what it was. We didn't know for a bit, and then how to help him. Right. So, I was reading books and while I was in medical school and all these different things. And I found the gift of dyslexia, and it really was kind of the start and understanding. It's like reading about Jonathan. So then once I understood that, I used that kind of that curiosity tool to keep Jonathan interested in learning and doing these different techniques. So that's how we did. And he by 9th grade, he was caught up with his peers, went on to graduate college and all these amazing things. But that's just one of those things. So using that even in yourself to help you solve problems, but also igniting that in those kids, even when they're struggling with a problem, if you can make it interesting and use their natural curiosity on something, you can really use it to propel them to do something good. So I don't know. There's just so many things you could do. I appreciate it.
And
but
I would love to see the educational system really, look at curiosity as a way to drive learning rather than, test performance and forcing students to sit in a classroom for X period of time and, learn some material. It's like, how can you make that material come alive?
Right.
And I remember I was in Montessori school for a couple of years when I was younger. And I think that's what Montessori is all about. It's just like, let kids run around and explore stuff. And that was like the best schooling I ever had. So if we could figure out how to kind of bring that forward throughout an entire education, I think we could really transform the educational experience for kids.
Absolutely. I mean, I was in high school and I looked at Montessori, for our kids. We were just in a place that we could put them in it. But I was in high school and I remember one of my favorite teacher in high school, and the most amazing things that I remember learning was in my physics, because he brought it alive, right? He really, you've done other experiments in school and stuff, but he had a way of teaching and getting you excited about maybe even the most dull experiment with light, but it was just like so fascinating how they presented it and really got your natural curiosity. And the whole class was engaged. It wasn't just, the nerds like myself, but it was like even the jocks were interested, so it was really, it's a skill and it is something that can be taught how to do that. So I mean, we really should put a manual together for parents and teachers. So, yes, absolutely. But Dr. Brewer, Dr. Jud, we love you so much. And DrJud.com is a great resource. That's where a lot of this can be found. Is there other places people should connect with you, follow you, look for the apps? Where should we go?
The website is a good place to find all of those. So the apps are there, my books are there. I also am on Twitter, not a ton, but I'm on Twitter some, at Jud Brewer, JudBrewer. And I also have some videos on YouTube, some short educational videos. So folks can just look at, I think it's Dr. Jud. If they search Dr. Jud on YouTube, they can find him there.
And there's some really excellent videos on talking about anxiety and COVID and some other things as well. And your Instagram is awesome as well. So we'll put all those links, guys, below. But thank you again for always giving us your time. We so appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. So everyone just pay attention and please click and check out Dr. Brewer and also order his new book. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that video. Before you go though, please hit the subscribe button and the alert button so you will be notified whenever we upload any new videos. On Monday, we upload the Healthy Human Revolution podcast. Now, if you'd rather listen to the podcast, you can find it on all the major platforms such as iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and even Spotify. On Tuesdays, we upload the Doctor's In. This is where I answer your questions. Thinking of that, could you please comment below any questions you might have about health or wellness or any topics that you would like me to cover? Now, if you're looking for more resources on how to start a plant-based diet, sustain a plant-based diet, exercise, recipes, anything regarding wellness, we've got you covered. Check out healthyhumanrevolution.com. And again, thanks for watching.